My name is Cara Clairman. I'm the president and CEO of Plug'n Drive. We're so thrilled to have so many of you with us today to talk about multi-unit and EV charging. We have a really interesting program for you. You're going to learn about a pretty unique technology to make it more feasible to charge in a multi-unit or condo. And so I think with that, we're just going to get right into it. The only administrative thing is I am putting everyone on mute because it's a big crowd. And but in the question and answer, you're free to unmute yourself and ask your question verbally. And of course, you can always put questions in the chat if you prefer, and I'll be monitoring the chat and I'll read them out. So either way is fine. But for now, while we're presenting, if you could keep yourself on mute and keep your camera off, that would be really helpful just with such a large group. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to just admit the last group here and get started. Okay, Alan, can you go to the next slide, please? Thanks. So, of course, I always like to start with a little bit on climate change, and I'm sure most of you already know this, but there's a reason why everyone is talking about electrified transportation, and that's because transportation is actually the largest emitting sector here in Ontario. And actually in most jurisdictions, it's either number 1 or number 2. So we really can't tackle our climate goals. We can't achieve our climate goals in Ontario or anywhere if we don't tackle transportation. And that's, of course, why we're hearing so much about EVs. I mean, honestly, in a way, it's for some of us who've been working in EVs a long time, you know, it's pretty exciting to see something new in the news every single day about it. Oh, I just see someone in the chat saying they can't hear the sound. So if someone else could just indicate to me that they are hearing me, so I know that it's maybe just that person's mic. Okay, sound is good. Thank you. Okay, good.
We hear you fine.
Thanks for your help. Hello, Mr. Cormier. Oh my gosh. So we've got lots of folks who know plenty about EVs in this crowd. So I just like to focus on this because, of course, the reason that we are Plug'n Drive anyways is focused on EVs is really for this reason. We want to see we could take a big bite out of our transportation emissions. And if we go to the next slide, please, you'll see why. Ontario's electricity grid is extremely clean. And so you're going to plug in your electric car mostly at night because that's when it's convenient. And at night in Ontario, you're plugging into mostly nuclear and hydro and a little bit of wind. It's not emission free, nothing is emission free, but it is very, very low in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So you're going to make a huge drop, as much as 95% here in Ontario. And that's true in many parts of Canada. You know, if you think about the hydro-based provinces like Manitoba, British Columbia, Quebec, they all have almost emission-free electricity. And so plugging in your EV does a huge benefit to the environment compared to driving a gas car. And so this actually is the main reason that we're all focused on this as one of the solutions. Now, I often hear, well, what about biking and what about transit? And shouldn't we be focusing on that? And my answer to that is yes. We can't think about EVs as the only solution. I love the expression that, you know, Al Gore made popular years ago. He said, there's no silver bullets, there's only silver buckshot. And I think, you know, EVs are a great example of that. They make a huge improvement when you compare a gas car, but of course, even better if you create bikeable, walkable cities and transit and all the other things we need to do. So there's not just one answer to any of these problems. Okay, Alan, next slide. Okay, so just 2 minutes on Plug'n Drive. This is the front of our EV Discovery Center. This is in the GTA. If you happen to be in striking distance of the GTA, love to have you come visit us, Finch and Dufferin. It's a place where you can come, test drive vehicles, learn all about EVs with no pressure to buy anything. So we are open by appointment only, very COVID safe. So please consider dropping by. Next slide. This is just another view to give you an idea of the cars and chargers, and we have everything you could want to know. And by the time you're done there, you'll be convinced if you aren't already. Next slide, please. So just 2 minutes on, all the excitement of what's happening around the world and here in Canada. We're seeing millions and millions of new registrations for EVs. We're up to a global fleet of almost 13 million cars. Considering last year there was 7 million, I mean, it's doubling and more than doubling annually, and the projections are really dramatic. So, I mean, as you've probably heard, there's no more if, it's just when, and groups like Plug'n Drive are trying to make that when a little bit sooner. Next slide, please. And of course, we are a nonprofit, and I would be remiss if I did not thank our sponsors very much for all their support in making our work possible. Without them, we couldn't do all the things that we do, and including webinars like this one. And it's been a tough year for a lot of organizations with COVID, and there was periods where we couldn't be open, and it's been challenging, but our sponsors have stuck with us, and we really just thank them so much for thinking that EVs are important part of the solution and sticking with us. And next slide, please. Okay, and just to wrap up, before we get into the meat of what we're talking about today, I think we can all agree that it's exciting times for EVs, especially with announcements as late as today. If you were watching the news this morning, you saw Doug Ford. He'd already announced there's the big three are all making EVs in Canada. But just today, he announced sort of an acceleration of EV manufacturing and a focus on all the supply chain, including parts, including mining, including making batteries. So all good news for EVs. We still need to do more to get the butts in the seats, but it's a real important step in the right direction. And next slide, please. And so with that, I want to get straight into the meat of our presentation today with our esteemed panelists who are going to talk to you about the Evolute solution. First up is Manny Alter, who is the Chief Business Development Officer at Evolute. And he spent most of his career in food manufacturing, where he had many roles in some of the big grocery players, as you can see here. He made a pivot into the EV world in 2014 when he met David, who you will meet shortly. Together, they formed a company called EVdirect. That's the company that has partnered with Eaton to bring you Evolute, and he will explain more about that. He's much better positioned to explain it than me. So Manny is responsible for sales and business strategy, customer service, etc. And I'm going to now turn my camera off, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Manny, to talk about Evolute.
Thank you, Cara, and thank you for that introduction. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Today's webinar, as much as it's on a solution that we are now providing to multi-residential units and buildings in Ontario and in Canada, it's more about process. And I think where we were 2 years ago, where developers, engineers, condo owners, tenants, property managers were aware that the EV wave was coming, there wasn't a lot of appetite for information to be shared. I think a year ago, we were in a position where more and more condos and apartment building owners were starting to think about it, but weren't thinking about having to pull the trigger. Where we are today is we see an influx of interest in EV sales. And as Cara mentioned, the news just continues to propel that forward. So it's very important for anyone who lives, works, owns, manages a multi-unit residential building to not per se install something today, but at least go through the process so you fully understand what you're getting. One of the lines that I use when I'm talking to clients is it's more important in the EV world to know what you're not getting than to know what you are getting. There's a lot of products out there. There's a lot of solutions. Every building is different. Everyone has their own needs and their own specific limitations within in their building. So it's very important for buildings to go through a specific through the steps and through the specific process when it comes to EV. It isn't complicated. It doesn't have to be expensive. It is actually very straightforward. And I'm hoping by the end of this webinar that those watching will have a little bit of a better understanding of the process they need to go through. If you can go to the next slide, please. So what are the limitations when it comes to EV charging in a multi-residential building? We're looking at limited power, we're looking at cost, and we're looking at management. And essentially what limited power is that regardless if you're an existing condo or an apartment building, or if it's something that is being developed today, there's only a limited amount of power that either you have or that you can bring in to the building to dedicate for EV charging. We need to work with that available power. EV is coming. There's going to be 20, 40, 60, 80% of buildings that have in the future EV drivers. We need to be able to accommodate all those drivers. Number two is cost. So if you're going to plan for this, there is going to be a cost that comes along with it. You could do short-term solutions, you could do one-offs, and those are something that will take care of a small need and an immediate need, but it won't take care of a long-term need for EV. If your building is looking for long-term solutions, there will be a cost that you'll have to incur. So how do we work with cost? And last is management. If you're putting in a system that's going to accommodate the masses in the future, how do we do this in a way where you have control of it, but it doesn't become either a burden for your property management or a large cost for the end user? So these are things that we need to look at. Next slide, please. What are the options when it comes to EV charging in your building? Well, there's three options: single run, pay-as-you-go, and multi-user. Single run is essentially what it is. Condo or apartment building isn't interested at this time to look at EV charging. They want to accommodate the end user, so they're going to allow that end user to tap into the building's existing electrical panel, run pipe and wire to their parking spot, and put some sort of metering device at the end. The pros are straightforward. End user gets charging. Property management or condo doesn't have to make an investment, as the end user will pay for everything. The cons are it's a terrible long-term solution. You may get away with one or two of these, but the more that you do of these, the more headache you're going to have in the future. And really where we were a year ago, we were seeing a lot of condos and apartment buildings allowing it. Those condos and apartment buildings are coming back to the table now and saying, you know, we had one or two people interested a year ago. We have 3, 4, 5 people who are now inquiring, you know, how do we move forward? So it will accommodate an immediate need. It won't take care of a long-term, need for EV, and it could cause more headache in the future. Pay-as-you-go charging stations is something that I think there's still, different opinions in the industry. And I want to be clear, when we talk about pay-as-you-go for this specific application, we're not talking about a building that says, you know, we're a high-end building, we want, you know, charging for our visitors. That is a separate conversation. What we're talking about is using your visitor parking and putting in pay-as-you-go charging as infrastructure for all the owners in the building or the tenants in the building to use for charging their vehicles. The reason why we at EVdirect are strongly against this is because it is an extremely expensive way to give you the least amount of EV charging that will only accommodate, you know, really 1 or 2 people in the building. And what I mean by that is a pay-as-you-go charging station is going to cost you in the range of $4,000 to $6,000. Let's call it $5,000 to supply and install. Your building puts in 2 of these. Building to spend $10,000. The second you have more drivers than EV charging stations, it is going to become a headache. Even if people are willing to move their vehicles after they're fully charged, so it's 11 o'clock at night, do you really want as a tenant or an owner in a building to have to go down every night at 11 or 12 o'clock at night to move your vehicle into the charging spot? So it's something that only really accommodates 2 spots. So you spend 10 grand, 2 spots. There is no ROI. So anyone who tells you that this is a business, you can make money on it, is probably not giving you the right data. And really the long-term issues are that by the time you do finally pay this off, which may take 4 to 8 years, the station that you've put in is probably going to be obsolete, that hardware, so, or outdated or needed upgrades. So it's not really a great solution for EV in the masses. And that brings us to a multi-user system. And this is really what us and our competitors in the industry is trying to recommend to developers, to specifiers, electrical, contractors, property managers, developers. I think I said developers already. Owners, tenants, anyone who's involved in a multi-residential building, and that is, if the average EV driver only needs 1 to 3 hours of charge per night, and in the worst case scenario really doesn't need more than 4 to 6 hours, why would we dedicate 100% of power 100% of the time to one owner when we have a limitation, when we have a cost issue, when we have tracking, billing, and monitoring issues? So why not start with a solution and a system that can not only deal with today's 1 or 2 or small amount of EV, inquiries, but can be expanded and managed in a smart way. Next slide, please. So these are the things that you need to think about when going into EV. What is the process? What are those steps that we're talking about? So I can tell you, if you are a multi-residential building that has spent less than a month on EV charging and has implemented some sort of infrastructure in that quick a time, you are probably not getting what is most ideal for your building. We all talk about turnkey and easy and quick. Unfortunately, when it comes to EV, it is not that way. There are products that can help your immediate need and take care of you and give you EV charging, but will it be a solution that will deal with the long-term uptick in EV charging? It is a process. You got to go through that process. It isn't complicated. It is actually fairly straightforward, but to really look at all the products out there, because again, every building is different, every need is different, and every product is different. So you need to take that time. Research and due diligence is really 2 parts. Research is, what can our condo accommodate? What is our load assessment? What is our available power? What is the existing switchgear? What is our layout of our garage? The second part of it, and those are really things that a company like ours or any EV company can help you with, in terms of, we'll come on site, we'll have a look at your building, and we'll give you that in a report. But there's more data that we need to collect. What is the interest? What is the buy-in? Who wants EV? Who doesn't want EV? Where do you want the EV? And I'll give you an example. A condo will say to me, or any building will say to me, what is the most ideal way of implementing EV infrastructure? And the answer is, if you have 100 parking spots, the cheapest and most efficient way of doing it is to put in infrastructure today for all 100 parking spots. The problem with that is, it is a little bit premature. And to spend that kind of money to make your condo 100 or your building 100% EV ready is probably overkill. But finding that fair line between what is too much and what is too little is something that we need to figure out, A, from your condos and your building's ability, and number 2, buy-in from the owner. So it's very important to walk through that process of collecting data, figuring out what's out there. The third step to this is looking at products. Now, there are a lot of different products out there. Everyone's obviously going to say that their product is the best. At the end of the day, there is no perfect solution. Every solution has its pros and cons. It is on the property management and condo boards to really do that due diligence of taking the time and figuring out what are the pros and cons of each solution and which solution works best for us. The second step is implementation. So regardless of the solution that you've chosen, there is an implementation piece of, let's take an example of a building that has 3 levels of parking. You've decided that you want a solution that can accommodate 20 vehicles. Well, there's 300 parking spots in that parking garage. Where are you putting the system? How are owners tapping in? Do you want to wake up in 2 years from now and find out that 20 people have tapped into the system, and now there's 20 sets of 3/4 inch or 1 inch pipe running through the ceiling? So it's not enough just to say, okay, we've picked our solution, throw it into the building. let's take the time to walk through and really understand, what we're getting in terms of this implementation. What are the extra costs? What are the savings that we can have? And how can we do this in the most efficient way based on all the data? And then the last one is owner engagement. So that can mean one of two things: owners of EV vehicles, who are already interested, and tenants and owners within a building who may, number one, want to buy in as an investment, just because EV is coming and people may want to add this to their units or have it accessible. What is the buy-in? And that is something that's important. I'll tell you, 9 out of 10 times when we put in a system, within a month, we'll hear from 5, 6, 7, tenants or owners within the building who we have communicated with already, but now that they actually see the system in place, and some people have charging, they're always coming back and saying, okay, how do we get part of this? And there are multiple ways of financing it. We are, working with companies like Smart Energy Recovery, who, if look at the project, may be able to finance the project for the client. We're working with TAF, who has access to funding, who can maybe fund part of your project. So it is not only important to figure out what you need, how you need it, and who you need it for. Are there funds out there that we can apply for? And it is important to do it in that order. Too many times I hear clients saying, well, there's this fund or there's this grant that I want to apply for, based on their criteria, this is how I want to implement my EV. And that is really the wrong way to look at it. I'm not belittling the fact that, you could save some big dollars in these programs, but it is more important to get what you need and then figure out if you can get funding, rather than getting funding and trying to build your EV infrastructure around that, and then finding that you've gotten 30, 40, or 50% off a solution that doesn't really work exactly for your condo. Next slide, please. So let's talk about EV infrastructure. The one thing that everyone in the EV world can agree upon is that every building, regardless of where that building is in Canada, regardless if it's a rental or a condo, regardless of the demographic, regardless of the age, will need EV infrastructure. It is coming. People are going to buy these vehicles and they're going to want to charge them in their parking spots. Basic EV infrastructure is a panel, pipe and wire, and charging station at the end of the line. So regardless of how you go about it, you're going to have to dedicate a panel that holds breakers that are going to control and charge those EV vehicles, pipe and wire from that panel to parking spots, and some sort of charging at the end of the line. The problem is, if you kept your infrastructure this simple, just a regular panel, regular pipe and wire, and regular charging station, which honestly is not expensive, quite straightforward and easy to implement. The problem is, if you leave it this simple, you're going to run into a situation where, number one, you run out of power. Number two, you still have to figure out how you're billing and monitoring. And number three, the implementation of not having all these wires running through the ceiling eventually. So at the end of the day, we've, as an industry, have decided we got to make something in this infrastructure smart. Well, you can make the panel smart, or you can make the charging station at the end of the line smart. If you could just click one forward, Alan, please. So let's look at the charging station. Well, to make a charging station smart, it means that your condo has to invest and look at different types of charging stations that are then going to hold call it the brains of the operation, and then be able to share power and to speak to a cloud to track, bill, and monitor on behalf of the condo. The other way to do it, if you can click one more forward, please, is looking at the panel. And that is where, instead of putting the brains of the operation in the charging station, you're going to put it into the panel. And we'll do a little bit of a deep dive into this, and then I'll end with that. But essentially, the difference between these two is where the smart charging station is selling you exactly that, a smart charging station. We are looking at a panel that says, okay, we don't care about the charging at the end of the line. We're going to supply you with a panel that is going to deliver power in a smart way. The charging, as much as it is EV charging infrastructure, the charging station at the end of the line really doesn't have anything to do with this implementation. Next slide, please. So what are the key differences between a network system and a smart panel? Well, essentially, for a smart charging station to be able to communicate to other charging stations within the parking garage, you're going to have to boost Wi-Fi. You can have a charging station on P1, P3, east, north, northwest. Those stations need to communicate. They will communicate through that Wi-Fi. Well, if the Wi-Fi is down or the Wi-Fi is lagging, not only will your system may not work efficiently, it may not work at all. Property manager will get a call in the morning and say, I don't have charging. This isn't a light bulb in my, in my hallway where you could take a week to fix. This is something that is stopping me from charging my vehicle. So is it a major issue? No, probably not, but it is definitely a red flag to build your EV infrastructure on something that really can become, a burden for both drivers and property manager. The second aspect of it, because the charging and the brains of this operation are in the charging station, you need what is called an OCPP charger or a proprietary charger. Proprietary, definitely most people in the industry do not recommend, and that is where the system will only work with one type of charging station. That is extremely limited because now you are locked into that station. An OCPP station will allow you to choose multiple charging stations within the network. But again, those charging stations, number one, are typically more expensive than a regular charging station. So just to give you an idea, a regular charging station is within $500 to $1,000 range. You can even go with a NEMA plug, which is in $150 to $200 range. A OCPP network charging station is typically $1,800 to $2,200. So it does come with a cost. It also is probably not your preferred or recommended charging station, which means that if you have a warranty issue, or if the way we charge changes in the future, you could be looking at an expensive replacement or something where the property manager now hears from 20 people who say, look, you forced us to buy this charging station, it's either obsolete, needs to be upgraded, or not working. That's the second limitation. And lastly, billing defined. So what billing defined means is that you will be able to speak to a number of software providers, especially if it's OCPP, and use those software providers to do your billing. You will never be able to customize your billing. And in other words, if you have 3 or 4 different software providers that are really all, billing you in the same way, which is, anywhere between $15 to $25 a month as a recurring basis, plus some sort of revenue share or transaction fee of anywhere between, we see 3 to 10%, you're kind of locking yourself into a solution where your monthly charges can be higher than the actual energy that you're using. And that is something that is very frustrating and that we're hearing from our clients that essentially are saying, just because we have a limitation within our condo doesn't mean that someone should start monetizing and making money on our limitation. We want to be able to deal with that limitation, but we don't want to be locked in. And that's really where a product like the Evolute comes in. And the Evolute is essentially what we've been talking about, is a smart electrical panel. The Evolute is a collaboration between Eaton and EVdirect, and you're really getting the best of both worlds. Eaton is a company that's been building panels for about 100 years and are a leader across the world in panel building. And EVdirect is a company that deals with all the end users and really understands the needs of developers and property managers and tenants and owners. And essentially the way that would work is you're putting the brains into a electrical panel. Essentially, you no longer need Wi-Fi. It is the panel that does all the load management, not the stations that are communicating. So we've removed the need for Wi-Fi and relying on an internet line. The second benefit is the charging station. Because we've put the brains of the operation into the charging station, into the electrical panel, we no longer need to dictate to end users what charging station they need to use. So if you're a developer, you can now go put in, a bunch of NEMA plugs and let the end user plug in whatever they want. If you're a condo or an apartment building, again, you can tell the end user, we have brought power to your location or to your spot in a smart way. Off you go, pick whatever charging station you want. If there's a warranty issue, not the condo or the property manager's issue. And if the way we charge changes, you're now replacing a $500 piece of hardware, if you'd like, to the new, upgraded hardware, which may also be in the $500 to $600 range. It's not an expensive change. Lastly, and I'll end with this, is the billing. We've essentially said to the people who have the Evolute, you could do the billing any way you want. The 3 options are Number one, internal billing. So the Evolute comes with load management and a dashboard. Property manager can see everyone's usage and use that information to bill owners and tenants internally. There would be no extra cost or no extra fees if that was the way. You could also speak to a third-party billing provider, or to, if you have a sub-metering company in your building, they can do the billing on your behalf. Again, the Evolute and EVdirect would not be involved in that. You would be able to set it up the way you want. Lastly, and the way most of our clients are using it, is just using the in-house or in-app system, which essentially is no contract. So if your property management finds a better way of doing billing in the future, you're not locked in. We charge $10 a month, not 15 or 25 as a management fee. It is not a recurring fee. So if you're not using the system, or if you bought in as a investment, you're not billed for it, and there is no revenue sharing. 100% of what we collect on behalf of the property management or the owner is returned to the corporation or to the owner. So essentially, and I'll end with this, it is important for condos and apartment buildings, regardless if you think you have a need for this today or in 6 months, to take the time to go through this process. So when the need does arise, you have gone through it, you understand the different options, you understand what you're getting, you understand what you're not getting, and hopefully the EV implementation will go smoothly. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Cara.
Hi there. Thanks so much, Manny, for laying that out for us. And now I'm going to introduce you to David Ackermann, who is the Chief Technology Officer at EVdirect and partners with Manny. David actually worked in the film industry for 8 years before he got involved in the electrical industry and became an apprentice. He became, of course, a licensed electrician, and he started his own contracting company here in Toronto. And then he partnered with Manny to form EVdirect, which was about retrofitting lighting. They moved on from lighting to EVs, and that's what we're talking about today. And you'll see he is more on the technical side, and he's working on software and products for the EV sector. And with that, I'm going to just turn it over to David to continue the discussion.
Thank you so much, Cara. So just to touch briefly on the technical aspect, if we can go to the next slide. Just before that, I just want to clarify something. So the Evolute is a joint venture, joint product between Eaton on the hardware side and EVdirect on the software side. And in terms of the software, what we've done is we've got a very comprehensive management software for both ourselves and administrators. And then there's the end user platform, which is available on a desktop, on a tablet, on a mobile device. And the functionality of that end user app is to be able to communicate with your power, not so much with your charging station. As we know, most charging stations have their own app, cars have their own apps. So we've got a bunch of apps doing pretty much the same thing, but our app is geared towards controlling the power supply to your station, so you can turn it on and off remotely. If you're going out of town, or if you're away during the day and you feel you're nervous about somebody else tapping in, you can turn that off. And then end users can look at current and historical data for both their amperage, voltage, kilowatt hour usage, as well as all their historical billing information, so they can look at previous bills and charges and so on. So that's on that side of the software. And as I mentioned, on the management side, we have a lot of different bells and whistles, which I'm not going to go into at this point. We can take that up for the discussion. So on the technical discussion in terms of implementing EV infrastructure, really it comes down to understanding, as Manny mentioned earlier, every condo, every building is different. There's different incoming power, there's different voltages, and there's, of course, different available power. So the first thing that we would want to do, and anybody should do, is some sort of a load assessment, whether it's by a third-party engineering firm or it's by companies such as ourselves. And it's a very simple load assessment to a certain extent. We're basically looking at historical data from your hydro bills, hopefully looking at bulk bills and determining, what was the peak usage at any given time over a period of 12 months or 24 months or whatever we're given. Then we're asking for and doing a site visit to collect information on the existing power. So if we look at drawings such as single line diagram, we can see what was the power that was spec'd in the drawing phase, and then we can look at the actual system in the building and see how old it is there spare disconnect switches or spare panels or spare breakers? Do we have to do an external connection, a bus tap connection? Is the equipment obsolete? Do we have to come up with some other way to get power? So once we've done a load assessment, electrical system, we're going to be presenting a site visit report as well as a load report and basically coming up with a plan. And the plan starts with how much power you have available, but also input from buildings as to how many spots they're interested in energizing, how many people are interested, where do I start today, and how much room do I have for the future before I run out of power. Of course, with many, many buildings participating in lighting retrofits, there is a little bit more power available, although lighting retrofits really, when you compare it to the amount of power needed for charging stations, it's not that many, but it definitely helps. So the idea is to get an understanding of how much power is available and what you want to do with that power and how you see the future developing. A lot of that will depend on doing internal surveys, finding out who's interested, who would buy into this kind of system. And then once we've determined all of that, now it's time to kind of look at the actual footprint of the building. Is it 1 level or 2 levels, but a very wide footprint, or is it 7 or 8 levels with so within that, a lot of that will depend on how many, tie into the stuff we just mentioned, how many spots need to be energized, who's interested, and how you're going to implement that. But essentially what we're going to look at is how to bring the panels to a central location so the most amount of people can tap in with the shortest runs to their spots. Seen as the pipe and wire is something that the end users are going to be paying for. We don't want to have 300, 400, 500 foot runs. Sometimes there's nothing you can do. You can't avoid that. So one of the things we're looking for physically on the site is areas that we can install these panels or multiple panels on multiple floors, whether it's a corporate spot that can be used, whether it's an extra space that was created behind one of the parking spots, whether it's in a sub-electrical room, main electrical room, locker room, mechanical room, and so on. So we're going to go through the building and look for that and, present some drawings with some red lines, basic information as to where we think this should go. Once we've determined that, we're going to try engage with end users to find out who's interested in getting an estimate. And we'll come back to site and measure each person who has requested an estimate. And that's going to vary from 50 feet away to 300 feet away, and as well as participating in the costs that the condo might have spent on the infrastructure that they're looking to recoup. The location is really important for many reasons. And we've installed systems in so many different areas, and there's different pros and cons to all of them. Some boards insist that they want it in a locked room. Others are okay with it being open as long as it's mechanically protected as per ESA standards and so on. And really then you get a full picture of where the systems are going, how many systems you're putting in, and how people are going to tie in. One of the things that we do and always should be done is if, let's say you have a three level parking garage and you decide to put the Evolute panel on the second level, we're always going to tie in the first level and the third level with junction boxes as an access point, so that if somebody is on one of those other levels, they just have to run pipe and wire to that access point, and then it will go down or up into the panel. Just to give an understanding that in terms of panels, we have two main sizes. We have a 400 amp panel that can accommodate up to 20 cars, and we have a 600 amp panel that can accommodate up to 32 cars. And then we can network these panels and add panels in the future as things are required and, depending on power and availability. That kind of ties into future considerations. We want to look at what your available power is from the very beginning and then start off slowly depending on usage. That's really one of the main aspects of future consideration. And the other is just being able to look at your system and say, yes, we've designed this system based on peak values. This is the most we've ever used. And therefore, we're safe to say we can add X many charging stations, but we also have other features and hardware that we can add into the network of panels, whereby we can monitor the mains of the building and dynamically throttle the amperages being delivered to each panel independently and as part of the network. So that way we can actually get a lot more people on the building and not only rely on the peak power that was identified. So that's, in brief, the technical side. Again, don't have much more time to go into this, but we're happy to consult and talk, directly on a building by building basis. So thanks for your time, much appreciated.
Thanks, David. And we're going to move on to our final speaker. We do have lots of questions, so please do stay for the last 10 minutes because we'll get to all these questions. Next up is Aditya Ramesh, and he's the product manager at Eaton. He, of course, Eaton is the one that makes the panel boards and switchboards, etc. for Eaton. He's involved in managing both design and commercial growth of Eaton's low voltage products. He works with EFC, that's Electrical Industry Association, and of course is partnering with EVdirect on this particular offering. So with that, Aditya, can I ask you to turn your camera on?
Thank you, Cara, and thank you everyone for joining us. Alan, we can jump to the next slide. So as Manny and David kind of described the solution, finally here we've got some images of what it actually looks like. So that is the Evolute solution, which is, of course, comes in a panel board footprint. So I'll start off by saying this is CSA 29, which is the CSA standard for panel boards. It's been certified and tested as per CSA 29. And when we worked with EVdirect, what we wanted to do was make sure that the solution was obviously compact to fit existing installations, existing buildings that need EV capabilities. We wanted to make it versatile and, of course, scalable for the future as well. All sort of topics that have been discussed, reasons for why that's important has been discussed so far. So with that, in terms of the compactness, all the panel sort of configurations come in a standard width. It's the height of the panel that's going to change between the different options, which is essentially the different number of charging stations downstream that can be load managed. So that width is 28 inches wide. In terms of the chassis rating, David touched on this as well. So we've got our standard 400 and 600 amp, and we've now got a design that goes up to 800 amps as well, which essentially means more chargers can be simultaneously turned on for the EV owners in the parking spaces. And finally, these panels can be also connected. So you can have multiple panels forming a larger sort of grid for additional EV loads. So when you look at, for example, a 400 amp panel that can do 20 EV chargers, and an 800 can go all the way up to 30 EV chargers. So you have multiple panel boards, and then of course, scale the total number of parking spots in your building that are managed and load managed on the same network in that fashion. So in the next slide here, Alan, if you can jump to the next one, I've just got an image of the internals of the panel board, and it's really got four main components. I'll start off from the left and then work my way clockwise. So the first thing is the PLC. So that's really the brains that control the entire solution. That's where EVdirect's proprietary load management program is programmed into. And then next, we've got the breaker control bus, which controls the circuits, which are feeding the EV chargers downstream. So that's the circuit bus that would turn on and off the breakers. And finally, from a metering perspective, we've got the PXBCM, which is our branch metering solution, accuracy of 0.5%. So it is revenue grade metering. And this all ties back into EVdirect's platform, where all the metering for each one of the spots is monitored and managed and billed to the EV owner whose parking spot that belongs to. So, so those are the main 4 components within the panel board that comes together to provide the Evolute solution. In the next couple of slides, I'll talk about, yeah, Alan, we can go to the next one. So in the next slide and the one after, I'll talk about a lot of that scalability factor, right? So what you see on the image that is sort of flowing through some of those different images is what we call an IFS solution. So it is a switchboard footprint, again, tested and built to our switchboard standards here in Canada, 31 and 244. And that gives consultants and contractors and designers the ability to work with a much more compact footprint where the upstream transformer, the upstream distribution that's protecting the transformer and the EV panels are all integrated into a single enclosure solution. So where you've got your Evolute panel board, the upstream transformer, and any 600 volt distribution that might be feeding that transformer all in one footprint. So that again ties back into that compact, versatile, and scalable solution, really useful for new buildings, especially where you want to keep the overall footprint of the electrical distribution system as compact as possible, and even have the EV panels within the electrical room itself, and then run conduit and cable out to the specific parking spots in the garage. In terms of the transformer, you can have up to a 225 kVA transformer within the enclosure itself. In some cases, we have even done projects where we can go up to a 300 kVA transformer. So a lot of flexibility and scalability there as well. And Alan, if you go to the next slide, this is sort of a more futuristic, but a solution that we all can imagine very easily today. So because the solution is in a panel board footprint, the upstream and any alternate sources of power that need to feed into this panel board is very easy to integrate and build out from an electrical distribution point of view. So this is just an image that shows you how you can have a battery storage system, or you can have your EV solar cells feeding the panel board. And then downstream, it doesn't necessarily have to only load manage between electric vehicles. You can have multiple other loads in your building as well that you can have within the EVdirect solution to load manage and load share with your electric vehicles. And on the last slide here, I just want to remind you about our manufacturing footprint. Again, something that comes in very handy when you want to scale and offer these solutions across Canada. So we've got 6 manufacturing plants where we can build the panel board solution that you looked at. So this just gives those end contractors and end users the ability to order from the manufacturing plant that's closest to your location. Helps with lead time, helps with you dropping by the plant if you need to look at any factory acceptance testing, and even work on any customization. I mean, these panel boards at the end of the day are built and designed by engineers in Canada. So if you've got a particular solution that requires you to tailor the panel board and the circuits in a particular way, Eaton and EVdirect can work with you on that one. And with that, I'll hand it back to Cara, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Well, I think that wraps up the presentation. So can I ask all the speakers just to put your cameras on? We have a bunch of questions and I'd like to get right to them. And you guys between you hopefully figure out who is in the best position to answer it. The first question here is, Jeff wants to know something about obsolescence with Evolute. For example, if you install this system, what happens in 5 years? What happens in 10 years? What's the risk in terms of it becoming obsolete?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. That's a very good question. And the reason why we developed it this way is because the one thing we know that will become obsolete or need an upgrade is the charging station. Essentially what you're buying here is a smart electrical panel. So as long as we're delivering power through electrical panels with breakers that are then connected to pipe and wire to charging stations, we don't see that portion of it becoming obsolete or outdated. It is the hardware at the end of the line that we feel is something that will have to be upgraded, but the panel at the end of the day is a panel.
Fantastic. Thanks, Manny. Okay. Does your, I think I know the answer to this one, but does your usage measurement comply with Measurement Canada?
I'll take that one. Like I said, it's 0.5% in terms of its metering accuracy. So that is revenue grade. It isn't MCA approved. And really for a lot of the applications today, because in Ontario and even across the country, we aren't exactly set up to resell electricity for EV charging purposes. A lot of the billing is still based on the time of use and the time of charge, and EVdirect solution takes that into account. So they are able to meter the amount of power that's consumed by the EV in terms of how long it is charged for, and the billing is based on the rates within that distribution utility network.
Excellent. Okay. Okay, another option that one viewer mentioned is that you can install direct charge controllers, something that apparently is quite popular in Montreal and other parts of Quebec. Could someone speak to the pros and cons of Evolute versus these direct charge controllers?
I guess I'll take that. I believe they're referring to like the DCC 9 or DCC 10,
Right.
where you interrupt the meter from the meter to the person's panel with this device. It's certainly a good option when you have meter centers in the basement and close by. It doesn't really help much when you've got digital metering, suite metering on the floors and so on. It has its time and its place, but it's not a full system that does multiple people. It's just a one-off.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. One of the viewers said he didn't fully understand the $10 per month billing option that Manny spoke of. Is it $10 per installed charger or just per MURB?
Yeah, so it's a good question. It's $10 per user. So once the system is set up and you have power to your charging station, if you use that charging station that month, we will calculate your energy use based on a rate that the condo or apartment building owner wants to set. And then our fee is $10 on top of that. So regardless if you use, $2 or $100, we tack on that $10 fee.
Right.
If you are away for 6 months or you've bought into this system as an investment and you're not using the charging, you don't owe your corporation or your property management money, and we're not going to collect that money, and therefore the $10 won't apply.
I see. Well, that's, and probably, Manny, it's important to note that I think most of the systems, there is a per one fee, most of the systems out there.
Correct. So we can track with the Evolute, we can track either time of use, we can track a flat rate. If you want to charge $100 an hour as a condo or as an apartment building, we'll bill and monitor based on, we'll obviously give you recommendations, but based on how you want to bill and monitor and track that usage, we will capture that for the owners or the corporation and then tack on the $10.
Sure. Another question, how is load management accomplished? Is it through current splitting or circuit sharing?
So load management it's actually a load shedding scheme whereby we are giving everybody on the system 100% of the power. So if they're on a 40 amp breaker, they're going to get 32 amps, 6.7 kilowatts, but they're going to be restricted by how much time they're going to get that depending on how many people are charging at once and how many people are asking for that full 32 amps. Many smaller hybrid cars or some cars are restricted to much lower amperages or kilowatts, and therefore our system is constantly monitoring the amperage total per phase as opposed to numbers of charging stations or number of cars.
Okay, thank you, David. There's a question here that I'm going to take. There's a question, how will hydrogen fuel cell vehicles being introduced to the EV market impact the demand for these types of systems? I think the truthful answer is we don't know. But right now, infrastructure for electricity is everywhere, and hydrogen fuel cell infrastructure is right now nowhere. So I always like to think, let's not let that prevent us from taking action now to do EV charging. If hydrogen fuel cell takes off and becomes affordable. Right now, it's out of reach for most people. That's a whole other thing. But I think for now, we don't see that happening in the next 10 years or more. Okay. This one from Michelle. My high-rise condo is 50 years old. It's already running on max electrical load. Are there any solutions to accommodate EV infrastructure?
I would say yes, maybe not right away, but with battery technology, storage technology, and other renewables, there will be something in the future that we can integrate. Right now, it might not be cost effective, but I would say that we would still want to look at the condo, look at the bills, and assess it to see, how much room there might be. And maybe in this case, it might be a scenario where you do put one pay-as-you-go station in for everybody to kind of share, because that's all there is.
Right. And also one of the things that we've heard, and this building might have already done this, but if you do the LED light retrofit, sometimes that opens up a bunch of capacity. Next question. Okay, so we are at 3:59, and so I just wanted to say I'm going to continue with the questions. I know the panelists are willing to stick around for a few more minutes. So folks, if you want to stay, and we'll continue with the Q&A. For those of you who are needing to go right at 4 o'clock, thank you so much for joining. We will send out the slide deck, and you will receive information about EVdirect, and you should have seen on the last slide, and still visible, the contact information for the folks at EVdirect and Eaton to follow up on the product. So thank you so much, and let's keep going. How is electrical safety incorporated into the system? Does it rely on the circuit breaker? Or are there other items such as overload, arc, etc.?
So I'll take that one. So the circuit breaker itself is 10 kA in terms of its interrupting capacity at 240 volts. Upstream, we've got a disconnect as well ahead of the transformer. That's usually the electrical distribution system design. And downstream within the chargers, even if they are not the network managed chargers, by CSA and even UL requirements, there needs to be a certain level of circuit protection within the charger itself. So you've got enough protection ahead of your EV itself, and EVs themselves with the onboard chargers also have their onboard level of circuit protection. So there's a lot of protection before any power gets to the battery on the EV itself.
I just wanted to add to that, we also have a software soft breaker for further protection, and that's something we can discuss also.
Excellent. Okay. Are the panels 600 volts or 208/220 volt input?
So they're 208. It's a 208 system, so we're delivering power to the AC charging stations for the required amount. You don't need individual transformers or anything like that. So it's based on a 208 three-phase system.
Got it. In a condo with 17 parking spaces, if the smart panel is used, can the EVSE in my parking spot be used by another user without my permission and at my cost, or can it be restricted subject to my approval?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll take that one. So the system does come with an app, the Evolute app, which is very specific to our system, and it allows each end user to control remotely their charging station, so they can turn power on and off. So if you're out of the garage and you're worried that someone is going to use your charging station, you can actually, from your app, turn power off. That being said, we have some owners who don't feel that that's enough. You could purchase a charging station that needed, card access to tap. But from our experience, most owners of charging stations want to pull in, charge their car, and walk off. So you do have that security from the app to be able to control your charging station remotely.
Yeah, I always find that one interesting because now maybe in an underground it's different, but I can tell you as someone who has a parking pad in front of their house and no garage and a charging station just sitting outside, no one has ever tried to use it and it is not locked. So I think it's a rarity that someone would do that. Do these systems have protection from cyber attack?
Yeah, I mean, other than the regular kind of security in our own software, in our own system, these are all cloud-based, on some of the biggest networks, AWS, Linode, as well as Stripe. So, we're getting a lot of the protection from these companies through their servers and our own servers as well.
Okay. Okay, and how would you efficiently run out this infrastructure in a cost-effective manner if you have 112 parking spaces on one floor and the parking spots are allocated on title, so owners cannot move the group of EV user near a single panel? The first two adopters might be 200 feet apart as an example, while we want each run to a smart panel to be as short as possible.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And this is really where one of two things can help. Number one is added infrastructure. And essentially what added infrastructure is, and David touched upon it in his presentation, is adding 2.5-inch or 3-inch pipes through the main laneways of the parking garage with access boxes every 50 to 60 feet. And essentially what's going to happen is two things. Someone 200 feet away now doesn't have to run 200 feet of pipe and wire back to the system. They're only running 40 or 50 feet of pipe and wire to the closest access box. And then once you hit that main infrastructure, you're just running wire through, one central pipe. So it does mitigate the cost for people further away. And it also is one of those solutions that will keep your ceiling a lot cleaner, because now instead of having, 20 or 40 or 60 sets of pipe all being piped back to your central EV panel, you have, uniform pipes going to access boxes every 50 to 60 feet. And from there, you run your wires, so everything is cleaner. The other way to look at it is, and this is where owner engagement really can help, because if you can only find, 10 or 15 people on day one, you're limited to one system. We're working with condos today that thought they would only need one system, but have reached out to owners and said, who wants to buy into this? And essentially have found 30 or 40 or 50 people who are willing to buy into it. And therefore, we now, instead of having one location, can implement 2 or 3 locations. I also want to add, I know I'm going on a little bit, but think of your garage more as vertical than horizontal. Some people are saying, well, if I have 3 levels, I need 3 panels, 1 on each level. That may be the wrong way to go about it. Maybe say divide the garage into thirds vertically, put 1 panel all on P2, let's say. We can pipe access to P1 and down to P3, and now everyone is in a shorter run because they're in their third of the parking garage. So this is really where customization comes in, and working with each apartment building or condo to figure out the shortest runs for owners.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Does your design include identifying conduit run locations and sizing to accommodate 100% build out from the start, and then only build when a resident signs up? So this is, again, I think about your customization.
Well, I was reading that question, and really it comes down to budget, because if we had to go to condos and right away say, well, you should put in 6 panels and run, 3,000 feet of pipe and here's the bill, we're not going to get off the ground. So it is possible to do it from that aspect, but we think it's better to kind of understand how many people want to get charging right away, where the best place to put it is, let people know what the options are for future infrastructure and or minimal infrastructure to start with, knowing that you could upgrade, but not go the other way.
Right, right.
If I could just add to that. So one of the things we're having a lot of success with in condos is one of the beauties of the Evolute panel is that is your infrastructure. So if you were to implement an Evolute system that has 20 car capacity, you can then go out to owners in your building and say, okay, you don't need to run pipe to your spot. You don't need a charging station. You don't need fees. You don't have to worry about EV, but would you pay a 1/20th, which typically runs in the $1,500 to $1,600 range for that, to secure yourself a spot in the system? In a network system where the charging station is the brains, you need to run the complete install to your spot and put a charging station to be part of the system. In the Evolute, you just need to pay your condo back a 1/20th piece of that implementation. And we're finding condos that go out to owners who live in condos that are worth $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 are extremely happy to drop $1,500 to now say on title, we have EV capabilities in our spots. So the more people in the condo that you can get to say, we want to buy into this, the better we can implement that infrastructure. We're actually dealing with our first condo that is trying to get 100% of the owners to say, look, we'll buy in a 1/20th or a 1/100th of the system, and let's just implement it across the board. So that's really where the data and the buy-in from owners could really help implement the infrastructure.
Okay. And what is your approach to working with boards and property managers on the creation of an EV infrastructure reserve fund? It seems connected to what you're talking about.
Yeah, so there's different ways. And again, we can make recommendations. At the end of the day, it's the board of the owners of the property who are going to make that decision. There are ways to monetize within the Evolute. In other words, if the 1/20th only costs the condo $1,500, maybe they charge $1,800 and put that $300 into reserve. There's ways on the billing side, to monetize on that and set fees. Most condos that we're working with, obviously apartment buildings, the owners of the apartment buildings own it. But in condos, we're finding that most condos are not looking at reserve funds. They're looking at paying off the infrastructure and making sure that 100% of what is being used in terms of electrical is being recouped. We have some condos who want, set up reserves, and we can work with your condo to help you put a policy together that puts a few bucks into a reserve fund.
Okay. And will your system offer vehicle to grid capability if the LDCs at some point enable that?
So yes, I mean, the capability of the breakers and the system and the design can work with that. I'm still wrapping my head around what that looks like in terms of pulling up somewhere and now dumping your power from your battery somewhere else, or is this only when you're connected? And I mean, it seems like there's a lot of excitement about this, but I'm not sure how viable it is. But the short answer is yes.
Okay, and are the panels able to accommodate? Oh, that's essentially the same question. You've been talking quite a bit about retrofits, and what about new build? What's the sort of cost differential? And they're saying, is it preferential? And I think that the obvious answer is yes, much cheaper to do it when you're building the building. But one of you guys take that one.
Yeah, so our recommendation to developers is that the Evolute really is, the most efficient way of going about putting in EV infrastructure. A lot of developers that we're talking to today are not even running pipe and wire to every single spot. They're putting in enough Evolute panels to accommodate 100%. And then they're putting in either access points throughout the garage and really setting up the infrastructure beforehand to really accommodate 50 or 100% of the condo. So it is a more efficient way, obviously, to do it, from the outset. And the value add of the Evolute to a developer is that they're not investing in charging stations, especially when a building is being spec'd today that won't be occupied for 2 to 3 years. It's very hard to pick hardware today when that hardware can be obsolete, in 2 to 3 years. So the Evolute allows the developer to put in provisions for 50, 60, 100% EV capability. Either run NEMA plugs at the end of the line and receptacles for then owners to plug in whatever they want, or put in centralized access points to then run power to spots. So it is definitely highly recommended today to developers that are building both apartment buildings and condos, especially that are in design today that won't be occupied for 2 to 3 years. We are going to be between 20 to 60% in 2 to 3 years, so you may as well make your buildings ready.
Sure. And does the meter have to be recalibrated in the future?
That would be done through software, but they're good for 10 years, and we have remote access to the meters and to be able to recalibrate.
Okay, and here's the $1 million question. What's the general price of the panel?
So every install is different. So I would tell that person to reach out and ask. But the rule of thumb is the complete install to someone's spot in a condo, regardless of the solution, should be in the $4,000 to $5,000 range. And that doesn't mean there are some special scenarios where it may be less than 4, and some scenarios where just because of the condo or apartment building, you'll be higher than 5. But we're finding that most of our installs, which includes paying a 1/20th of the system, running pipe and wire at around 100 feet to your parking spot, getting energized, paying all the fees and putting in a charging station, should be in the $4,000 to $5,000 range per end per drop.
Okay, good, thanks. And do you certify or otherwise maintain a list of EVSEs or charging stations that will resume charging after power is lost and then it's restored? Is there some control that you have?
So I'm not sure what the question is, but we do have a list of stations that we recommend, but we try to stay kind of out of that market. We obviously don't recommend using a smart charging station or a network charging station because it's expensive and counterproductive. But we do have a list, and all the testing and all the manufacturers, you know, when you take power away and resume, they just start up again and charging starts again.
Okay, good. Okay, still more, my gosh. Okay, I think that, oh, we had a bunch of the cost questions. Okay, is the software open ADR?
So like all software, which is proprietary, you know, there's this whole notion of software being open. To a certain extent, there's two sets of software. There's the PLC software, there's the load sharing software, and then there's the front end, back end. We are working on eventually an OCPP version, but at this point, no.
Okay.
I just, if I may, sorry, Cara, if I may.
It's okay.
This is something that, you know, is a discussion at board levels and owner levels. You know, do our products need to be OCPP? So I just, our feeling is that OCPP does have a value. It's not something that's made up or that doesn't have a value. It has a value when you have multiple locations with multiple needs in multiple areas with different charging stations. It allows you to use different charging stations with one software. A condo or an apartment building is one entity. Yes, there may be 200 or 300 parking spots. It is one entity. OCPP does allow you to use different charging stations, but all those are network charging stations. OCPP allows you to use different software, but all the software indicates that if you don't use one of the three softwares, you don't have access to the data anyway. So you are still, as much as it's open protocol, you are still locked into a certain parameter. The beauty of the Evolute is, yes, of course, the software is proprietary to the Evolute, but you can do the billing in 20 different ways the way you want it. You can charge your vehicle in 20 different ways the way you want it. So we feel that OCPP may not have the value add in single condos or apartment buildings that it has for owners of, you know, multiple plazas across Canada.
Right, right. There's a couple of questions along the theme of, do you have testimonials from buildings, etc.? How long have you been in business, etc.? Should I suggest for that people contact you? I'm sure you do have that.
Yeah, this is not a new product. It was launched, so it's been in development for probably 5 years. The Evolute product that you see today, which is version 3, is a product that was launched in January of 2020, which is the Evolute and the collaboration between Eaton and EVdirect. We have tons of installations. We have tons of you know, testimonials. We have hundreds of users in the systems, property managers, owners who could tell you that, you know, it's everything that that they were promised, and you know, they're thrilled with the product and how it works.
Perfect, perfect. And just a couple more here, and then we're going to wrap it up. There's a question about, can you use the Evolute for power sharing, but the third-party contractor for suite metering?
Yes, so essentially we have some deals even with some of the larger billing providers out there that essentially would work with Evolute and say, okay, we're going to use your data or put on our metering, which is redundant, and just add it to the existing bills in the condo. So we do have the capability to partner with any sub-metering company to then have the usage from the Evolute added to existing hydro bills within the condo or apartment building.
Okay, and can you mix 20 car and 32 car panels so we could cover, let's say, 112 spaces, which 3 times 32 and 1 times 20? Like, can you mix and match like that?
Yeah. It's basically the same panel, the same software, it's just in a bigger shell. And as I mentioned before, we can also network them so they can actually communicate with each other. And if you have a 32 circuit panel that only has 6 active users, but you have a 20 circuit panel with more active users, we can deliver more power to the 20 circuit panel while there's more users there and less to the 30. And then it dynamically plays around as power becomes more available or less available and so on.
And the last one here is just about whether you folks will coordinate a site visit if somebody's interested for an existing building. Who should they contact for that?
So they can reach out to EVdirect, either Manny at EVdirect, David at EVdirect, info at EVdirect. And essentially the service that we offer is a free site visit. We will come to your site. We will assess your existing electrical. We will have a look at your parking garage, and we will provide you with, number one, an electrical site assessment, just general information on your building. We can provide you with a no-cost load assessment, some recommendations and pricing. Once the condo or apartment building has that package of EV, we then work with the property manager and board. We could do in-person or Zoom consultations, map out, work with you. So essentially we're happy to provide you with all the information you need at no cost to the corporation.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I'm gonna stop it there. Most of the others seem to be on the same theme of some of the questions we already covered. Thank you so much to Manny, David, and Aditya for helping us today understand the product. I hope everyone watching found it helpful. Please do reach out to the Evolute team for more information. You will receive a follow-up email with more information. And if you're interested in a copy of this deck, let us know. We're happy to share it and the recording if you're interested. Thanks so much, folks, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Thanks, Cara.